Well, thank you all for being here today. We appreciate the great turnout at the Congressional panel here at the Sea Aerospace Symposium. I want to thank the staff of Sea Aerospace from the Navy League for doing a terrific job of setting up this event and getting us all pulled together today for an in-person discussion about the future of shipbuilding. And we are honored here to have with us two of the experts on shipbuilding in Congress, as well as two of the leading figures in terms of making decisions about shipbuilding for the future. Immediately to my left is Congressman Rob Whitman from Virginia. He is the vice chair of the House Armed Services Committee, ranking vice chair, I apologize, as well as being the ranking member of the Sea Power and Projection Forces Subcommittee. And he's also on the Environment Committee. And then to his left is Congressman Joe Courtney from Connecticut. He is the chair of the Sea Power and Projection Forces Subcommittee on the House Armed Services Committee, as well as being on the the Agriculture Committee as well. Education and Labor, I'm sorry. I had that written down, I didn't read it. But thank you all for being here. Thank you, Congressman, for being here.
Thank you.
So to lead off our discussion, I just want to obviously address the elephant in the room. So the budget came out last week. In it, the Navy describes a plan to allow the fleet to shrink over the next decade or so, and then eventually it might grow again. We have not seen the shipbuilding plan that would be associated with that. Presence it's projected to maintain at about the same level, which means the fleet's going to work harder and deploy longer. The series of investments towards R&D are going to try to improve that future fleet's capabilities, but we haven't yet seen the details on exactly what that entails. A smaller fleet that's working harder, dealing with increasing challenges around the world. What was your takeaways from the budget, and kind of where do we think you need to go for the Navy to get back on a good trajectory?
Go ahead.
Congressman.
Well, listen, I have deep concerns about the budget. First of all, I'm not a mathematician, but it's hard to do addition by subtraction. If you're going to build 8 ships and you can't count LHA-9 twice, and you're going to retire 24, I just don't see how you get to 355 ships, which is what the statute says. And then if you say you're going to maintain the same level of presence, you make an assumption that every maintenance availability is going to be met in the yard, which we know has not been the history. We know, too, that you are now really pushing sailors to the breaking point, and we see what happens when you've done that with the McCain and Fitzgerald. Right. We also know, too, that when you run your ships harder, and again, when they get to the yard for maintenance availabilities, we know the problems that occur there. And so I think there's a whole cascade of issues with what has been put forward in the Navy budget. It certainly doesn't get us to where we need to be with increased presence around the world to counter the Chinese, to make sure we have presence in places like the Med, where we could have potentially had some impact on the Russians' behavior as it relates to Ukraine. I think we see the incredible importance in today's world of the Navy Marine Corps team. Listen, our Marines, our airmen, and our soldiers, and for that matter, our sailors are fantastic. But you know what? They can't walk on water. So we better be building them ships.
Right.
So again, we've been through a few rodeos together over the years, and the most recent one, which already seems like an eternity ago, the final budget, which was signed, and the ink is barely dry. When that came over from the White House, again, it had 8 new ships. The final product took that up to 13. Right. And again, there was a fight over decommissioning cruisers, which was included in that budget, and so. I think, looking at our subcommittee, which usually goes first, so we kind of are the pathfinders, I would, somewhat unabashedly say. I mean, I think, you're going to see change in terms of, what comes through our process. I would note, though, and I think this is worth noting, is that if you look at the dollar amount, which is one of the metrics also when you talk about shipbuilding, it's close to $28 billion, which is higher than last year's enacted level, which again was just signed into law. That's the first time in 6 years where the actual dollar amount that came in on SEN exceeded the prior year's enacted level. And so, once you look at focusing for a minute just on production, shipyard production. The fundamentals that are included in there, which is 2 Virginias, 2 DDGs, Columbia, $6 billion this year. There is the LHA, which I totally agree with Rob. That's a double count. That one, doesn't count.
That's right.
Okay,
That's
but an LPD, an oiler, these are all, programs which really, and we've been to these yards, they are operating at pretty close to capacity right now. Again, I think the LPD advanced procurement request, which came in from the Marine Corps, I think General Berger and General Heckel have made a really powerful argument to all of us on the Hill, and I think that's one of those items that's going to change. But again, I think really at some point, we have to, when we're talking about growing the size of the fleet, we got to start looking at the whole issue of capacity, which is about workforce development, supply chain development, shipyard facilities, which if we're really gonna get to 355, that is fundamental. And I would give this budget actually some decent marks in terms of that particular piece. There is a huge investment in workforce development for the submarine program of about $250 to $300 million and $500 million for supply chain development. We have never seen numbers like that come over for components like that. The fundamental question on the net outcome, which I think Rob's numbers are absolutely accurate, is that we do have to have a conversation about just the LCS. I mean, that's the one that is the elephant in the room. 9 of them being decommissioned. We have to have the Navy has to talk to us about the rationale behind that decision. What do they bring to the Indo-Pacific region? What do they bring to the European theater? And I think we're going to be a very independent voice in terms of really getting to the bottom of that in terms of whether or not that move makes sense, because that's really where I think this number shifts and heads south.
Right. You make a good point that construction numbers this year are pretty strong, especially in comparison to previous years, and a lot of it revolves around the LCS. So just to drill down on that just for a second, the Navy might make the argument that the LCS-1 hulls, are the ones that would predominantly be coming out of the Atlantic and maybe going into the Middle East. Maybe the numbers of those don't need to be as high as maybe previous assessments had shown, and it's the LCS-2s that we need to be deploying to the Pacific. Have you had any of those discussions with the Navy about what the LCS deployment plan and the CONOPS might be and how that might play into the force structure numbers?
Well, I think we've been having a conversation about LCS for as long as the two of us have been in Congress, which is getting to be quite a while. But look at, really not yet. But I do think, that's obviously just screams out for a really hard look by our subcommittee. By the way, and I know there's some folks out here, Sealift is another piece of the puzzle, which I personally was kind of frustrated about. That they sent a pretty small increase in terms of growth for more used ships, and we've been waiting for Godot from the Navy to give us what their new build program is. And frankly, I think we're going to start moving out with our own ideas about ways for new build, which I think is we should be doing some of that right here in the U.S.
That's a good question. So, Congressman Whitman, so when it comes to Sealift, this idea of buying used ships, might make sense, I guess, for some of the older ships in the inventory, which, if you look at the Surge fleet, 40+ year average age, and some of those ships are pretty, normal commodity ships that you could buy on the open market. Some are pretty specialized though, and you're not gonna find a used, crane ship or something necessarily of the kind we need. So do you think new build, new construction, Sealift is something we should be taking a hard look at?
Absolutely, 100%. I think we need to be developing that capability within our industry, and the way we do that is to make sure we send a demand signal to the industry. You can't say, well, we're going to build 1 or 2 ships and expect the industry to jump up and go, we're ready to go with that. You're right, the roll-on, roll-off ships do have a role, but you cannot fully support the MSP with those roll-on, roll-off ships. We do need specialized ships. I think that we can very aggressively go to the industry and say, listen, we need to do a multi-ship buy. We need to see that they can partner, and we see what's happening right now with the Yard of Philadelphia. The partnering that's going on now is bringing down costs significantly. If we can create some certainty there, if we have not just the Navy, but MARAD look at different ways that we can execute this contract, And listen, here's the bottom line. The Navy never has been interested in building logistic ships. I understand it. It's not in their mission set. It's kind of like, yeah.
Right.
We got something else to do. So if that's the case, as the chairman has said, then we need to look at another mechanism because we have been on this now for, this is 6 years from going to the Transcom commander and saying, hey, listen, we give permission to buy a couple of used ships and nothing gets executed, nothing gets executed. We have got to find a different way to do that. New ship construction needs to be a part of that. We need to have enough certainty, enough longevity, and a multi-ship procurement to be able to bring costs down. And I think that you can do that. And I think we can bring it down to a place where it's reasonable for us here in the United States to build those ships. And we can partner. Again, they need to be U.S. made, but there's no reason why we can't partner with nations around the world that are our friends. They do a pretty good job in building ships.
Yeah, Korea, Japan, et cetera, Germany.
Exactly.
And with the Jones Act fleet finishing up the cycle of recapitalization, a lot of those smaller shipyards that might do that kind of work are going to have trouble unless we can give them a demand signal for other government ships that are going to keep them going. Let's switch a little bit here and come back to the Navy fleet. So one of the challenges the Navy has is keeping the ships it has actually out at sea. Particularly when you look at the nuclear fleet, the submarine forces have big problems keeping submarines out at sea because of the limitations of the shipyards, which are tied up doing carrier work. The investment in the budget for the shipyard infrastructure optimization plan is like the kind of the minimum level that the Navy had said, so of 1.7 billion or so. Do you think we need to do more there, or do we need to mount an independent effort to invest in the public shipyards? And do we need to think about even having another public shipyard to try to grow that capacity?
So, look, Readiness Subcommittee kind of has jurisdiction over the SIAP account, but you're right. I mean, it's 1.7 billion that came in, which was a little higher than last year. But if we wait to build out and modernize shipyards at that pace, I mean, it's going to be decades before we really see the kind of change that we're looking for. So. I think this is one of those issues. We almost, we tried actually to get the infrastructure bill as a vehicle to really kind of turbocharge, the increase there that fell short. But, it clearly, if you look at, just again, the persistent problems of delays in terms of the public yards, we've just got to do better. I mean, and you suggested, whether or not there's a potential for another public yard. I mean, that's a big one. But at some point, it's about volume. One opportunity, which I think is worth pursuing, is that with AUKUS, some of the conversations that we've had with folks from the Australian Embassy and some of the communications that are there, I think that new shipyard, or port that they're talking about building on the eastern side, I think that is a really good way to integrate, I think, U.S. and Australian Navy, particularly the undersea fleet, and having ship repair capacity that's actually out in the Indo-Pacific. Watching the USS Connecticut limp back to Washington State after its collision, it's just another sort of poster child example about, we really need to sort of start thinking differently about ways that we can keep the fleet, turned around quicker and also in the theater where they're needed.
Right.
Yeah, listen, I think we absolutely have to have immediate investment into our shipyards. Our public yards are aging, very little capacity for Ford and Columbia. In fact, we're going to be, I think, in a precarious position with those ship classes. We know that if you're going to fix those graving docks, you can't do them with ships or water in there, so you have to take those out of service, which means we're going to need the private industry to get in there and maintain those nuclear-powered ships. I think they're getting back into the process, but it's like anything else. You got to exercise that muscle memory to get good at it again. We had a billing called the Shipyards Act that would have invested $25 billion into our shipyards. $20 billion for public yards, $5 billion for private yards, because they do need to be recapitalized in certain ways. The PSYOPs plan, which calls for 20-year recapitalization, absolutely unacceptable. We don't have 20 years. I would argue you need to cut it at least in half. The way you do that is you have to get money out the door now. These are massive projects that you can't execute, in 6 or 8 months. And even when you go to bid and you award the bid, it's still going to take couple of years to get those places back. A great example is Norfolk Naval Shipyard. When you go there, it is a circa World War II shipyard. You go to the shops there, and you have to walk long distances from the dry docks to go to a shop. And then when you go there, you look at it and you go, where did this come from? This hasn't been modernized. And even simple things like bathroom facilities, childcare facilities are so antiquated. And we talk about not just the shipyards, but we need to be talking about workforce, because the way you attract and maintain and retain the workforce is you have to have a place that is at least commensurate with other places that build and maintain ships. And our public yards are not. There's a whole realm of things that needs to be done, and there needs to be a sense of urgency to do that. If you don't have that sense of urgency, guess what? It's going to continue to atrophy, and it will atrophy to the point where you will not be able to maintain a 355 ship Navy. I would argue that even if you have today a number in mind, with what you have today, you can't maintain that number. And so maintenance availabilities go long, you're missing those ships. A great example is the Boise. I mean, the Boise's been tied up for years. That ship, we need that submarine. And yet, guess what? It hadn't been available for deployment, now going on 5 years. Unbelievable.
Right. And they're last in line, unfortunately, at the public shipyards.
That's right.
So would you bring up workforce, which I think is a really important point. As we put more work into the public shipyards, it's going to put more pressure on the private yards to do some of the maintenance work that the public yards used to do when it comes to nuclear-powered ships, on top of a very strong demand signal already for carriers and submarines. How should we be working to help the submarine and the nuclear shipyards, nuclear construction shipyards, keep their workforces viable and growing, because they're all looking at having to grow to accommodate the work. What's the challenge there, and how are we going to deal with that?
So again, on being on the Education and Labor Committee, and I'm on the Workforce and Higher Ed Subcommittee. This is an issue which I actually think we, as a country, we have to deal with. There is not a sector in the U.S. economy right now that isn't struggling with workforce, gaps in demand. And, obviously the traditional sort of education system, through the 4-year, which is great for, millions of young people, still is going to be probably the workhorse. But we really have let the, apprenticeship program, job training sort of pathways really atrophy to an unacceptable level. So, the committee actually tomorrow is going to start marking up the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act, which is the sort of update to the real sort of workhorse of job training, the federal, and that allows basically state departments of labor to get funding out to workforce regions where employers participate with the local education institutions for very short-term, flash and bang programs of pre-apprenticeship to get people sort of job ready and hireable. So we have one of those in Groton. It's called the Manufacturing Pipeline. It's been around for 6 or 7 years. Its success rate is close to 100% in terms of the welding programs, the sheet metal, the electrical programs, and again, it's not just for the 17 or 18-year-olds. It's also for people who are in their 20s or 30s and really want to change their life and kind of get a restart. And we need to size it up, though. I mean, that's the problem. It's not a question of there's not enough people who want to participate. Nobody wants to get their hands dirty. Honestly, I think that is an urban myth. I think with the opportunity that exists in shipyards, in particular, in terms of wages and benefits and a career right now, that what really is the bottleneck is that we just need to create more slots so that models like MPI, and there's others all around the country, can really get us to the point where we're, particularly at a time when the baby boomers are heading for the exits, we've really got to get serious about refreshing the workforce with the millennials, the Gen Zers, and even the more middle-aged folks.
I think one of the challenges, at least that I get from the shipyards, is a willingness on the part of young people to go into this business. It may not be that they don't want to get their hands dirty, but they're just looking for a different work-life balance. They're looking for a different kind of quality of life in the workplace, and that'll cost money. So the shipyards might have to deal with that by paying them more, having more benefits.
So, the USS Vermont just got commissioned. Its workforce now is majority millennial, Gen Z. I mean, just those two age groups there. The quality rating when that boat came back was the highest of any Virginia class. So, I mean, it defied all the conventional wisdom that young people, A, don't want to go to work in a place like that, and B, they don't do the work that good. I mean, the fact is that there's ways, with the right training systems, you can get quality and quantity.
Well,
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, you're exactly right. And Joe's spot on about what we need to do in the career and technical education field. To me, that is going to be the most important part of the future of the American workforce. Several things we need to do is everything is structured for a 2 or 4 year degree. Right. And that means funding, that means 529 savings accounts. So let's change the whole structure. Let's say, hey, listen, if your parent is putting money into a 529 account and your child says, I don't want a 2 or 4 year degree, but I'd like to go get certification for a pre-apprentice program, then money's eligible for that. Let's use those dollars in any way, shape, or form in career and technical education. Secondly, the biggest source of federal funding for education are Pell Grants. Let's allow Pell Grants, because today they're limited to 2 and 4 year degree. Let's let them be used for non-degree tracks. If you want to go and get a course to get updated, or if you want to start a pre-apprentice program, you ought to be able to use a Pell Grant. I think if you do those things, that little bit of extra for somebody that's in a job that says, man, I'd really like to change, but, I'm on a really limited income with my family. And for someone who says, oh, it's not a big deal for them to pay $500-600 for a community college course, it is a big deal. Yeah. So if you now all of a sudden give them the bridge with those few dollars to do that, all of a sudden you open up a whole new round of people that said, man, I'd love to be a shipbuilder, but let's take away the but. If you give them funding opportunities, then they have a clear alternative.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I just want to note that we're going to have questions from the audience here in a few minutes. So if you have questions, we have a microphone up here in the front, so we can start lining up here in 5 or 6 minutes or so. But thank you. So talking about back to like the shipbuilding plan, or at least what we have of the shipbuilding plan. One of the discussion points this morning with the service chiefs was amphibious ships. And the Marine Corps would like to bring in this light amphibious warship as a complement to the amphibious fleet to deal with kind of the littoral environment in places like the South China Sea or the East China Sea. But it seems like that the Navy's positioning that as an alternative to the LPD, and that we have to stop LPD procurement in order to buy this new light amphibious warship. That kind of is emblematic of a lot of the transitions the Navy is talking about, is they want to move towards a larger fleet of smaller ships. Does that mean that we have to make these breaks from building the ships we build today to then building these new smaller ships? Or is there a way we can fare those in, or should we be looking at being able to build them both for some period of time?
Well, it's not. I think we need to build them both. Yeah. You need LPD. You need to do advanced procurement on LPD 33 now. Get that done. And remember, the laws, the light amphibious warfare vessel is different than a large lift vessel. It is not an LPD. These are intra-theater connectors. They're what the Marines are going to need to move around. 75, 80 Marines there with their equipment can move around. It gives them the flexibility necessary. Those are the connectors that we need for the future. We have things like ship-to-shore connectors now, EFVs. That's not what these things are. These things give that intermediate element to where the large amphibious ships can now operate with a lot more effectiveness. Yeah. And when you deploy, you can now distribute your risk across the theater. You can create some uncertainty for your adversary, and you can't do that with just one or the other. You have to be able to use both.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think the Marine Corps leadership has made a really convincing case that LPDs have a mission, and cutting them off, as you said, really, I think is going to deprive the country of a very valuable tool. Plus, cutting off shipyards is really kind of, gives me hives, as someone who's co-chair of the Shipbuilding Caucus, because, that's, we talk about, workforce, supply chain, all the things that we need to build out for capacity, that is poison, in terms of the damage it can do to suddenly have a program just, fall off a cliff. Right. And again, I don't think you should build ships as a jobs program for local economies, but on the other hand, if the service can make a convincing case that the value is there and the mission is there, clearly we have to be very mindful of a cutoff or a cliff.
Right, and as we found with plenty of cases in the past where we've taken a ship that we built for one purpose and we've adapted it to another, and it seems like the LPD could have a lot of roles that go beyond just the straight up amphibious assault ashore. Clearly as a support vessel for Marine littoral regiments,
humanitarian
aviation,
missions.
humanitarian missions. Right.
I agree. They need connectors and they need ships with well decks. Period.
Right. The one of the other issues that's come up is this as we look at the shipbuilding industrial base is the supplier base. So a lot of money got put into the budget this year for the submarine industrial base to help strengthen that supplier base and give it the ability to build some capital and invest in workforce. What about the other parts of the industrial base? Because I think when you look at the surface ship industrial base, the supplier base, it has a lot of challenges. Because increasingly those suppliers are unique to the Navy. They don't have a commercial business anymore. How can we work to strengthen those, especially when they're looking at the amphibious ship building program being very uneven over time?
So I think, clearly the investment in this budget for supply chain in the submarine program, which is an eye-watering amount. I mean, really, we've just never seen anything like that come over. It's certainly directly connected to the urgency of the Columbia program, which is that I think people realize that, the timeline that's on, which has no margin, and the brittleness of the supply chain that exists right now is just, we have to invest in that and really, strengthen it. And so, last year we sort of nibbled a little bit with funding in that area. And I'm visiting, a couple weeks now, a machine shop, small one in Manchester, Connecticut, woman-owned, that got $2 million out of that to build out for their new machinery investments. And now they are going to be just totally, up to the challenge in terms of, the pieces and the parts that they're supplying into the Columbia program. So again, when something works, then we should not be afraid to apply it in other sectors like surface ships. I mean, it's just clearly the sort of shipbuilding holiday or demise that we experience in this country. I mean, that's where I think all of these vulnerabilities have been exposed in terms of underinvestment in equipment, and these programs are necessary now, and again, not just limited to submarines.
Right.
Listen, we ought to be able to leverage too the investments that take place now in the submarine industrial base, because many of the things that they do are transferable to surface ships. Right. So let's make that investment. Let's make sure we expand the scope of what those businesses do, make sure that they are active in supplying the necessary materials and systems and parts for our surface ships. And with that, you send a very strong demand signal. And listen, the industry is all about demand signal. If they know the demand signal's there and they're willing to invest because they know that there's a multi-ship procurement, they know that that program is going to be around not just for months, but for years, they're willing to make that investment. So we ought to make sure that we're encouraging that, and we ought to, too, take the dollars that come from the federal level and make sure, too, that we're leveraging those dollars with state dollars, because states have an interest in economic development here, and leverage it with private dollars. Think about what we could do to just take those federal dollars. And then if you said, hey, listen, we need a match, private and state government, think about how far those dollars could go, and then said, okay, we're going to match it even more if you show that you can multi-purpose your production facility to do parts for surface ships. I mean, we can really build out a pretty robust industrial base doing that.
That's a great point, and it puts some onus on NAVSEA to kind of start making these connections and say, well, it's worth us buying the part from the submarine supplier, even though it's going to be maybe a more expensive part than we would have gotten if we had gone straight for the surface route. But at least that supplier is going to be in business for a while, and we can build him up over time to be able to
have an industrial base strategy overall, not just for one ship class.
Right, and it kind of sounds like that. We don't really necessarily have that. So let's turn to some audience questions. I will, if you can just state your name and affiliation and then ask your question, Justin.
Thanks, Brian. Justin Katz with Breaking Defense. Congressman, both of you expressed in some form or another that you don't believe the Navy's current version of PSYOP is good enough. Rep. Whitman, you said, 20 years is far too long. But at the same time, you said, there was a push for the Shipyard Act, which I don't believe, at least the original version of that, made it into the final bills. So I'm wondering, what do each of you believe is the current bottleneck with the PSYOP? Is it funding to go around? Is it the Navy's execution, the Navy's request? Because obviously, as we saw with the Shipyard Act, we can't just give them a ton more money. It just doesn't work like that.
Right. Yeah, it's not.
Go ahead.
I think that there are a number of steps that you have to go through. The thing is this is a cross-jurisdictional issue for the Congress to deal with. I wish it was as simple as we putting it into the NDAA and making it happen, but unfortunately, many of these are MILCON projects. So we have to be able to work those traps. I would argue it should be the top priority for the military construction folks to make those decisions, because that's the kind of investment that we need. I think everybody, members of Congress, including Joe and myself and others, need to start making the argument in a broader expanse rather than just HASC. I think everybody on HASC understands it, but we've got to broaden that argument. We have to make sure too that the public, the industry, all the different parts of what makes this work come together and say, by the way, if we don't invest now, we are not going to have the time to all of a sudden press the gas pedal and put all of these projects into place to modernize both our private and our public yards.
But I think your point, Justin, about execution is part of the problem, and again, it's not because anyone's doing anything wrong. It's just, it's been so long since, the Navy's sort of really taken this on, and the country's taken this on in a big way, that, already the initial RFIs and contract letting that's taken place for the initial money that's been already funded, the bids are coming in much higher than was anticipated. I mean, it's just, as I said, the muscle memory is gone, and for just not only the government, but also for the private sector in terms of how to take this on. So it's a sticky problem, and I think Rob's right, is that there was never a constituency for public shipyards, honestly. It's a different kind of animal than other defense platforms that do have, constituencies, and who are much more effective over the years in terms of lobbying. I mean, now, we know that this is something we can't avoid any longer, and we're going to pay a little price for that in terms of just both the cost and the execution.
Thank you.
Which raises there is a supplier base, though, for those public shipyards that may be something that the industry can tap into, and kind of organize a little bit better. Next question.
Yeah, I'm John Conrad with G-Captain. I'm a U.S. merchant mariner. I write about merchant ships, and for 20 years, the Coast Guard was trying to get an icebreaker, and they couldn't. And then you guys said, Navy, you have to hold their hand. You have the resources. You need to push behind it. And I see now we need Sea Lift, and you keep putting everything in MARAD, but MARAD's been underfunded and sidestepped for a while. So as long as Transcom keeps going to MARAD and everything else, you got to ask the Navy these questions. That's one. Second, I built $1 billion ship in Korea, and you had to apply as a customer for BP. If we wanted change orders, those all had to be applied, and we would be fired as a customer. We had to look at futures contracts for steel and look at financial instruments, bond ratings, credit default swaps. Half my job at building thing was to help the shipyard on the financial end. I just came back from the biggest maritime ship conference, finance conference in the world last week in Stamford, Connecticut. There were Coast Guard guys there. There was not a single Navy officer. Are they good customers for the shipyard? And do they understand how to work the finances to help the shipyards be profitable and move these ships out so we got space? Thank you.
So, I mean, I think Rob sort of alluded to the fact that, this is not, I think, high on a lot of the folks within the Navy's priority list. And so I actually think, MARAD has hit or punched above its weight in a really impressive way. The Maritime Security Vessel Program, which is being built at Philly Shipyard, and I think there's some folks here from Philly, is a perfect example of where Admiral Busby, when he was a MARAD administrator, basically just grabbed the steering wheel and said, we're going to create our own contracting system, and we're going to have serial production of these training ships that today it's a reality. It's very exciting, actually, and I think Admiral Busby is a genius. I think, that, when we talk about Sea Lift, his contracting model, which, again, it's just, it uses private sector approaches is exactly how we can really increase volume, build it here in the US, and not try and create, expensive vessels that end up costing $1 billion a pop, which is kind of what we're always seeing for sea lift ships when it's left in the Navy's hands. I don't mean to be, piling on here, but it really, if they don't want it, then let somebody else do it and we'll support them.
Listen, I agree. I think Marriott has a tremendous capability to do that. Their current administration of the program there at Philadelphia is an incredible example. They partner with folks outside the U.S., our friends. That's the way to go about doing it. They understand the need. The Navy is somewhat separated from this because it's not in the Navy's core mission. Listen, the Army needs to be standing up and going, by the way, you guys need to be building ships because if we're going to be part of this, we need to get there. Right. And if you can't get there, then I would argue that's 95% of the game. Right. It's being there. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And I'm in firm belief that we can do it efficiently and effectively in a timely manner and get what needs to be done for the nation, period.
Right. And the Navy does, tap into these ships once, sometimes when they need extra capacity, they need a float forward staging base, you need, something to go do a mine warfare mission, you turn Ponce, or Ponce is an LPD, but we've grabbed these ships before these gray hulls and used them for other purposes. So there's a reason why the Navy should be backing that. Next question.
Hi, Mallory Shelbourne with US9 News. I wanted to follow up on some of the remarks you both made about amphibious ships. Congressman Whitman, you said the Navy needs both the larger ships like LPDs and law, but the Navy delayed law until the first purchase till FY25. So the Marines say that ship won't deliver until after FY27. So I'm curious what you make of both the delay itself and what that means for the Marine Corps' ability to operate in the Western Pacific.
Sure. Well, listen, the delay in getting laws operational is going to create a challenge for the Marine Corps in order to be able to operate in the distributed way that they envision in the Indo-Pacific. And if they're going to have the ability to impose a level of uncertainty and a level of risk on the Chinese, they have to be able to operate differently. They have to be able to operate in that distributed manner. Our amphib ships with well decks are going to be incredibly important there, but you also have to have those intra-theater connectors. And it's more than just an LCAC or a ship-to-shore connector. It's more than just an EFV. You have to be able to move things around, Marines and equipment. And when you do that, you can increase the uncertainty for the Chinese there because they're not going to be quite sure what's going with that Marine Corps unit, what they have in their hands, and how they're going to impose risk, and how you move that risk around. If you're in a static environment, it's very easy for the Chinese to look at it and go, oh, I can do the risk calculus on that very easily. But if you move those assets around, and if they aren't quite sure what those assets are on those laws, let me tell you, all of a sudden the risk calculus gets bigger for them. That's what we need to do because they're doing that in every way, shape, or form that they can to us. If we require that they expend resources to counter the uncertainty that we're creating for them, that's how you'll be successful in an Indo-PACOM strategy.
Do we need to look at the law being a less expensive ship than the Navy is maybe arguing it is? I think part of what the Navy's calculus is the ship needs to be survivable to a degree, and therefore it gets to be more expensive, and therefore it tends to cut out the LPD. So the Marine Corps argues this should be a ship that's not highly survivable because we don't intend to drive it into harm's way.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's more of a connector, so your connectors are never designed to be survivable. It's the same thing that's happened with, as Chairman Courtney said, same thing that's happened with our logistics ships. If you keep adding requirements there, you drive the cost up, then you're ending up with $1 billion logistics ships. That's not what we need. The laws are the same way. The laws are not meant to be a warship. They're meant to be, as they say, a connector. If they're a connector, let's make them a connector. Let's don't turn them into something that they're not. Let me tell you, the great example of that is what the Marine Corps went through in trying to modernize the AAV, and here we are casting that aside because it took on too much, tried to do too many things, and the price tag went through the roof.
Yeah, good point. Next question.
Sheldon Johnson, I'm a retired systems engineer, and I worked a good part of my career on the DDG-51 program. That was, as you all know, one of the most extremely successful surface combatant programs the Navy had that I can ever know about. And we instituted, PMS instituted, very, very innovative procurement strategies in that program for advanced procurement of systems and hardware in advance of what was going on, because we needed the hardware to put on the ships to get them ready for trials, get them accepted by the Navy, put them at the sea, and have a presence of those ships, which I think was a major deterrent in many parts of the world. And one thing maybe you ought to start looking at are some of the innovative programs that have been done and been extremely successful. The proof is in the pudding. Pricing was consistently competitive. We got the hardware when we needed it. It was installed and hooked up by very qualified welders, pipe fitters, electricians, all the people in the yards that make those ships successful. Now, I just heard that when we canceled the pipeline program in the United States for production of oil and gas, we released hundreds of thousands of skilled pipe fitters and welders. The Navy needs always, and shipbuilders need, experienced pipe fitters and welders to build a ship. The other stuff comes apart with the high performance, combat systems. That's another world. But the people that really put those ships together are available, but they don't maybe know how available they are and how much they're needed. Maybe we need to have a national employment seminar or something with skilled people that you guys are looking for, and get out and move out and build the ships. Because as you said, sir, China is moving in the China Sea, and they're extremely powerful over there. And pretty soon they can set up naval blockades and cut off all commerce if they feel like it. So I think we need to really get going and move out on those things. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I agree.
But it does bring up an interesting point about advanced procurement. Congress has taken a lot of action over the last few years to do more advanced procurement to try to shore up the industrial base. Seems like that's something we are probably going to increase doing, both to reduce the overall cost of the shipbuilding program, or the peaks and valleys, but also to support the industrial base.
By the way, one of those ships we did add back in FY22 was a DDG. So thank you, sir, for your great work.
Yes.
All right, next question.
I'm Anthea Germano from Altoona, Pennsylvania, and I work with Congressman John Joyce, Pennsylvania 13th Congressional District. And my comment actually goes along with the gentleman before me as far as workforce. I was thinking that the trend now recently has been to shift from pushing college degrees to having our young people go into the trade schools. And I'm thinking that this would be an excellent opportunity for Congress to link each congressperson's district to go into the vocational technical schools within the district, both high school or private, and more or less recruit and or advertise. This is what we need. This is a burgeoning industry, and make it attractive for these young men and women to go into the trades, and perhaps that may help beef up your complement as far as the shipbuilding industry.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, real quick, the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, who I know a little bit because he's from Connecticut, he actually went to a tech school for high school. I mean, that's certainly a record, is that we have the first Secretary of Education who went to a tech high school. And, he's been, in my district with some visits to tech schools and seeing again how, the interest by kids, really tapered off there for quite a while. Now they don't have enough slots in the tech schools to fill all the demand that kids are seeing, because there's really good jobs there. what I think the next step is, and I think it's along the lines of what you said, which is that we need to really move out, not just to tech schools, but to comprehensive high schools, the regular high schools, to really bring back, programs for people in terms of advanced manufacturing and, other skilled trades. Because, we should, it's so, big what's happening out there that the tech school infrastructure is not big enough to help kids, connect to those jobs. So I think we're all on the same wavelength here, and hopefully you'll take a look at the WIOA Act when it comes out of committee.
30 seconds. 60% of the jobs in the future will not require a 4-year degree. We need to be emphasizing certifications and credentials because over a lifetime of earning potential, a student can earn as much, if not more, with a proper certification and credential than they can with a 2 or 4-year degree.
Yeah. And we're already seeing college applications start to drop off as
Right.
people become
Yeah.
frustrated with that approach. Well, I want to thank you very much, Congressman Joe Courtney,
Thank you.
Congressman Rob Whitman, for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate your time and your questions and your interest. And with that, I'm going to thank the Navy League for having us here today, and we'll wish you all a great afternoon.
Sounds great. Thank you. Thank you.